Joining us now is former Assistant District Attorney for Manhattan and New York Law School Professor Rebecca Roiphe, criminal defense attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, and New York Times investigative reporter David Fahrenthold. David, back to you on this issue of the moment that we were in the campaign. I mean, you broke the Access Hollywood tape. Bring us into how crucial this testimony could possibly be for the prosecution.
Well, you have to remember the prosecution they have to make a two-step. They have to prove two things here. Not just that Donald Trump lied about the documents that showed that Michael Cohen paid somebody off and that he paid back Michael Cohen, but that he did it for a specific reason. He lied in those documents to help his political campaign, to subvert an election, to hide something from the public. So that's why it's so important for them to be explaining the political context and the political meaning of the paying off Stormy Daniels. It wasn't just to hide something from Trump's wife, it was to hide something from the voting public. So yeah, the day after Access Hollywood, the story we wrote, Paul Ryan, the most prominent Republican in the House, was canceling events with Donald Trump. Other people, Republican elected officials, were telling their members, senators, hey, listen, if you want to cut ties with this guy, save yourselves, basically, walk away from him. It was a time of total abandonment. I've never seen a presidential nominee of either party abandoned, even briefly by their own party, the way that he was abandoned in the late stages of that campaign. So it helps you understand sort of the desperation he was in not to have another one of these shoes drop.
But what about the desperation, Rebecca, I'll bring you in on this, for Cohen to make this deal? Because it was initially going to be an AMI deal, a National Enquirer deal, but then the Enquirer says we're not a bank, we can't do this. And then there is a negotiation or a plea from Dylan Howard at the Enquirer to Keith Davidson to negotiate directly with Michael Cohen. He says he was really pushing him to do it. And you can see on the screen, Davidson says, moral of the story here is no one wanted to talk to Cohen. That's eliciting laughter from the room. But why is it important, or is it important for the prosecution to make it clear that this was not just a deal between AMI and Stormy Daniels, but a deal now directly with Michael Cohen?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as David was saying, the core of this case is about falsifying records. It's about lying on records. So this is setting up the key elements of the crime to come, which is why it did Michael Cohen and President Trump, former President Trump, engage in these series of lies. And so coming on the heels of this testimony, it makes quite clear that what their intent would be in doing that. It was now so much pressure on them to do it themselves, and they had to get around this problem of how do you pay this and hide the payment. And so we are really not only talking about the intent to commit or conceal maybe that state election law crime, which makes it a crime to unlawfully promote the election of a person through unlawful means, but also setting up the reason why, as you suggested in the early part of what you were saying, the motive for falsifying those records. And we have Michael Cohen coming up sometime down the road. And this is setting up a really good ramp for Michael Cohen, which is you don't really, he's almost just up there, and you don't really have to think he's a truth teller in order to believe what he is saying, because all of this is being set up by other witnesses, and those witnesses are being corroborated by these text messages.
Danny, I know you're thinking about this like a defense attorney is, and what we're seeing in the courtroom, according to our reporters who are there, is that Todd Blanche has been enjoying moments of this testimony, moments that describe Michael Cohen as somebody who was volatile and angry. Stormy Daniels says, she said jerk called her, streaming expletives at her, screaming at her. Davidson says he picked up the phone and called Cohen, and for the first few minutes, all he heard was a stream of vitriol. Blanche seemed to enjoy that. Why?
Because Blanche's central theme is going to be to cast doubt on the credibility of Michael Cohen. He's going to skewer Michael Cohen on the stand and establish that Michael Cohen has what we've all known for a long time, which are credibility problems. But here's the key. Look at this example of the Davidson testimony. Then you've got the testimony of David Pecker. Then you even have the banker Gary Farrow. At this point, with Davidson, Gary Farrow, the banker, before we've even gotten to Cohen, there seems little doubt that this transaction happened. So you see an example of by the time Cohen gets to the stand and he's called a lying liar, his pants are on fire, then you can say as the prosecution, well, all right, you may find him less than credible, but Look at all these other corroborating things we have. We have documents, we have wire transfers, we have the banker. He had no reason to lie. Davidson, by the way, when it gets to cross, and this is the way I think of it while this direct is going on, they're probably going to explore Davidson, the idea that, hey, this was kind of a sleazy arrangement, wasn't it? Or they might even suggest, aren't you in the business of essentially extorting people, or this is extortionate-like behavior? You might hear that, but that may not go far with Davidson to challenge what he's there for, which is to bookend this underlying transaction. By the way, here's something Davidson doesn't establish. He doesn't establish that Donald Trump was heavily involved. He establishes that Cohen was involved. So the people have gone a long way to establish the Stormy Daniels transaction, the payment. They're going to need more evidence to bring in Donald Trump. We've heard some of it. We've already heard some suggestions by David Pecker, for example, that Donald Trump cared about the campaign. We've heard there's also circumstantial evidence that the involvement in Catch and Kill may have increased as it came closer to the campaign. Those are all things the jury can rely on. But the people know they need to do more on Donald Trump's involvement and his intent.
On that, Davidson testified that he understood in dealing with Cohen, he was dealing with Donald Trump. He did not question that. Again, that is still one remove from Donald Trump. You don't have Donald Trump explicitly saying that he knew about what he was paying for. He knew about this deal. So far, you don't have that. You have a lot of people testifying that they talked to him about it. They heard him they heard him saying it, or they heard him, he was in on these conversations. They understood Michael Cohen was acting on his behalf, but as Danny was mentioning a moment ago, still one step removed from him. We'll see how close the prosecution gets as this testimony continues.